Hey everyone, happy Friday. Welcome to Broadband Deployment News. I'm going to be talking about satellite broadband again today, but not Starlink. I'm going to be talking about OneWeb, who is now back in business thanks to SpaceX. Be right back. Thanks for joining me. Rick UZ here from Zcorum with Broadband Deployment News. So I was talking about Starlink yesterday. A little bit of news about them and just talking about broadband in general via satellite. And OneWeb is another operator of low Earth orbit satellites. Now they have not really launched yet, but they've got satellites up in space. And they ran into a little issue where they're using Russian Soyuz rockets to get those into space. And because of that, they're not going to be allowed to do that any longer. There were some demands put on them that they refused. So I was going to talk a little bit about that. And interestingly enough, a competitor, they don't see them that much as a competitor, but really it is the competitor, Starlink, or really it's SpaceX, which is owns Starlink, is coming to the rescue here. So let's talk about this. So you see here, this was actually back from February 10th. So this is prior to the war in Ukraine. OneWeb surpasses 400 satellites with Arianespace's first launch of the year. So Arianespace is a French firm that is using Soyuz rockets has been using Soyuz rockets to launch various customers' items into space, including OneWeb satellites. So you can see here, this is the launch right here, and this one took off from the Guyana Space Center, and it had 34 new OneWeb Internet satellites on board. So again, this is French Guiana. In this case, Russian Soyuz rocket lifted off from French Guiana and hauled 34 new satellites into orbit for OneWeb's Internet network Thursday, bringing the tally of OneWeb spacecraft launched to 428 and marking the company's fleet 2/3 complete. So their fleet, at least what they're looking at right now in the first stage, is going to be much, much smaller than what Starlink is putting up, and there's a reason for that. Basically their satellites are going to be further out in space, more like 800 miles versus 200-300 miles. So they can cover larger areas, being that further out. They still have good speeds and fairly good latency, not quite as good latency as you would have with Starlink, which is several hundred miles closer, but they still, in the vacuum of space, it's not that big a deal. So they need much fewer satellites in order to cover the whole globe. OneWeb's fleet is designed to provide global low-latency, high-speed internet service, placed in a London-based company alongside competitors such as SpaceX's Starlink network and Amazon's planned Kuiper systems. That's another one, is Amazon is working on this as well, but they don't have any satellites up yet. The company plans to deploy 648 spacecraft in its first-generation network using 19 satellite deployment missions on Russian Soyuz rockets, marketed and managed by Arianespace, the French launch service provider. Launch Thursday was the 13th of 19 planned Soyuz missions for OneWeb. It's a kerosene-fueled Soyuz, which is interesting that they fly based on kerosene there. You see again a picture of the launch. Our first launch of the year marks our significant progress in completing a truly global LEO network later in 2022, said Neil Masterson, CEO of OneWeb. SpaceX has launched 2,091 satellites for the Starlink network to date. They may have had one launch since then, I'm not sure. Using the company's reusable Falcon 9 rocket fleet, SpaceX's Starlink satellites fly closer to the Earth than OneWeb spacecraft at an altitude of 340 miles, reducing its risk that failed satellites will create a long-term space junk problem. The lower altitude means the Starlink network needs more spacecraft than OneWeb to connect the globe. The deal between Arianespace and OneWeb now covers 19 launches aboard Russian Soyuz rockets from spaceports in Russia, Kazakhstan, and French Guiana. So again, this launch back in February, the last launch that went up was from French Guiana. OneWeb is planning another generation of spacecraft to handle more internet traffic, and that constellation could number 1,000 satellites. That would be more like what Starlink is doing. The next launch for OneWeb is another Soyuz mission slated for March 4th from Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. And that is where we ran into an issue. So can't quite see here. Hold on. There we go. UK satellite firm refuses Russian ultimatum on upcoming launch. So basically, after the war began, then Russia said they were not going to allow for this to happen. The Russian ultimatum was met with swift dismissal as the war in Ukraine extends to outer space. A Russian-built Soyuz rocket, operated by France's Arianespace SA, was meant to deliver the satellites into low Earth orbit, launching from Russia-owned Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. But Dmitry Rogozin, Director General of Roscosmos, and a former deputy prime minister with a flair for the inflammatory rhetoric, is refusing to go ahead with what should be a routine launch in response to UK sanctions on Russia following the invasion of Ukraine. The agency demanded that the UK government sell all stakes in OneWeb, and that the company guarantee satellites will not be used for military purposes, according to an ultimatum spelled out on Twitter from the Roscosmos official account. The board of OneWeb has voted to suspend all launches from Baikonur, the UK firm said in a statement on Thursday. Rogozin has tweeted flamboyant statements in the past in response to Western sanctions, namely 2014 after the Russian annexation of Crimea. After analyzing the sanctions against our space industry, I suggest the USA to bring their astronauts to the International Space Station using a trampoline, Rogozin said at the time on Twitter following US sanctions against Russia's space sector. So it's one of the things that happens when you kind of outsource your technology and your industries to other countries. And we've seen this in various ways. We saw this with the pandemic and outsourcing lots of medical kinds of supplies and pharmaceuticals to China. Russia outsourcing the fact that they're the only ones at this point that are bringing people up to the space station, the International Space Station. Of course, we've got NASA here, and we've got SpaceX that can do these kinds of things. So they have a little bit less leverage than they think. There's no negotiation on OneWeb. The UK government is not selling its share, tweeted Kwasi Kwarteng, UK Business and Energy Secretary, on Wednesday. We are in touch with other shareholders to discuss next steps. And here you can see this is a story about where Russia is actually removing the Soyuz rocket with the 36 satellites, and some pictures there. So you see this is where they're bringing the rocket down. On Friday, March 4th, Russia removed a Soyuz rocket topped with 36 OneWeb internet satellites from its launch pad at the Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, which is managed jointly by the Russian Aerospace Forces and Roscosmos, Russia's federal space agency. That would be now just like NASA over there. And here you see again they're lowering that. OneWeb missions have launched from Baikonur Cosmodrome in Russia's Far East and Europe's spaceport Kourou, French Guiana. Roscosmos had already halted operation at Kourou, ending Soyuz launches from the site for the time being and flying its employees back to Russia. The agency also recently announced that it will stop selling Russian-made rocket engines to United States companies. So I'm sure again this will be a boom for SpaceX. There again you see the rocket coming down. The Soyuz and the 36 OneWeb satellites that was supposed to be launched, meanwhile, are apparently now back in assembly and testing facility at Baikonur, hauled there by a transporter emblazoned with markings used by Russian troops in Ukraine. Arianespace, which has suspended Soyuz launches for this foreseeable future, said it aims to keep a close eye on this ground-bound hardware. Yeah, I bet they do. And it was interesting. I was looking at some video where they were taking these things down, and on the side of this rocket, I don't know if you can see it here when it's up. No, they don't show it. But on the side of the rocket, there were lots of different flags, including a U.S. flag and I think maybe it was the British flag. And the Russian folks were covering all that up before they took it down, so they weren't very happy. But again, SpaceX comes to the rescue. So OneWeb turned to SpaceX for help after Russia refused to launch the company's satellites, launching with a competitor in a time of need. Internet from space provider OneWeb says it will resume launching its satellites on the rockets of its competitors SpaceX, with the first launch expected sometime this year. In 2020, the UK invested roughly $500 million in OneWeb in order to save the company from bankruptcy, and the UK government became a major shareholder, along with Indian telecommunications company Bharti Global. Roscosmos rolled back the Soyuz rocket carrying the 36 OneWeb satellites from its launch pad, and the satellites have yet to be returned to OneWeb. The company isn't sure what happened to the spacecraft or if they'll ever be returned. So this is a few weeks later and they don't know whatever happened to them. I'm assuming they're in Russia now being looked at. The thing about satellites is, honestly, they're the least of our problems, said Chris McLaughlin, who's the chief of government regulatory and engagement at OneWeb. We make 2 a day in the factory in Florida, so we can find ways to get a resilient solution. What OneWeb didn't have were any immediate options for getting its remaining 220 satellites into orbit. Now it seems that SpaceX is answering the call, though the exact terms of the deal are confidential. McLaughlin declined to say whether the new agreement would cover all launches of the remaining satellites. The move may seem strange, as SpaceX and OneWeb are often viewed as direct competitors. However, McLaughlin argues that that's not the case, with SpaceX more focused on serving individual customers and OneWeb focused on selling its service to governments. We see them as being a broad-based consumer internet supplier. They do a very good job there. We see ourselves as more a niche government polar enterprise service. Very, very different products. While SpaceX has started rolling out its Starlink service to customers in the United States and other countries, OneWeb is still primarily in the testing phase with its constellation. OneWeb has activated service above the 50th parallel north. McLaughlin says that the company has only started the testing process in Alaska and Canada, while testing has just begun in the UK. Meanwhile, OneWeb has been making agreements with various companies and governments to distribute its service. In October, OneWeb signed a $200 million deal with the Saudi Arabia-backed company NEOM to distribute OneWeb's service in the Middle East. So that is kind of a differentiation in the 2 markets that they're looking at, but you're not going to see, I think, Starlink turn down any deals to provide any kind of backhaul services or reseller deals. Like what they're doing here is they're looking at like oversea and airline kinds of services for this service, but I think Starlink's looking at the same kinds of things. It doesn't sound like OneWeb is planning on marketing anything directly to residential customers, but they are possibly going to work with others, governments, or maybe even private companies. It says various companies here that would then resell the service. So they really will be competing. But SpaceX is stepping up. Now, SpaceX is, I'm sure, operated as somewhat as a separate company. So they do launches for all kinds of things. And this is just another company. They do launches for Viasat, another satellite company. So this is just another company that they're going to be, they see as a customer, but obviously this is a competitor as well in the near term, because these are low Earth orbit satellites that will definitely compete with them. But again, this SpaceX is being operated separately from Starlink, so I'm sure that's played into that. And I was talking about, like I was talking about yesterday, Starlink stepped up and they are providing now internet service over the Ukraine. So that's another kind of point to this story of we've got this war going on, and now you've got Starlink that's, I think they said they had several thousand of their terminals now in Ukraine that are being used not only by people there, by just folks that are trying to communicate out of the Ukraine, but also by the military. The military is using that to help drones target Russian armor, basically. So Starlink and SpaceX are involved in both of those things as well. So very interesting that OneWeb looks like they're still going to get off the ground here. How long that takes, they were planning on getting everything, all their full constellation of 620 or so satellites up this year. That may be delayed now. I guess it depends on how long it's going to take SpaceX to configure everything, because you got to figure that things do need to be configured, because this is a different kind of system that's deployed. There was a picture of it. I was going to try to find that on one of these. It definitely does not look like the Starlink satellites. Let's see, that's those. Maybe I can't find that. Look like they're basically about the size of a washing machine, and they don't really look very sophisticated. It looks like something out of a science fiction movie from, whoops, hold on here, the wrong spot. No, I can't find that picture, but it looks like something out of a science fiction movie from the 1950s compared to, let's say, the Starlink satellites, but we'll see how they work. So again, very interesting that this constellation is going to be up, and again, I don't know how long it's going to take for them to get the full complement of the satellites up now that this has been pushed back. But one of the things about SpaceX and what they're doing is they have these reusable launching systems. So unlike other systems where you fire the rocket up, I mean, you fire the whole rocket up and it's basically, you can't use it after that. they can use a good portion of that system. So it's like they're just managing an inventory of these boosters. So they should be able to get it up a lot faster than you might think. So I would not be surprised if they get this up in the next few months. So maybe they will be able to. And again, they can turn things around quickly. So maybe they will be able to get the full complement up by the end of this year. So thanks for joining me. Hopefully this was helpful for you. If it was, please give me a thumbs up on the video. And go ahead and subscribe. Click the little bell if you're not subscribed. You'll be notified when I am live. So thanks for joining me again. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.